Welcome to Senior Living Visionaries, a podcast for senior living leaders who are looking to stay ahead of the curve in the industry. On this show, we feature leaders and innovators in senior living who are pushing the boundaries and creating new, effective services and solutions. And now, let's settle in as host Jennifer Drago connects us with today's guests.
So let me ask you a question. When was the last time that you witnessed a great board chair in action? If you're a CEO or you've sat on a board, I bet you've seen your fair share of poor leaders. You know the ones I'm talking about, those that are toxic, micromanaging, focused on their own agenda, those that don't manage the discussion well, allow digressions, have unproductive or unfocused board meetings. We've all probably experienced some or all of those things. And so we know what a bad board chair looks like or a non-effective board chair, but what does a really good board chair look like? I feel like there should almost be a school or a class for people who want to be chairs of boards. But let's be honest, sometimes people don't even want to be a chairperson of a board, but they're asked because there's no one else. And how sad is that? So that's an important role for board development, leadership pipelines, and succession planning in your boards. Hi, I'm Jennifer Drago, and you're listening to Senior Living Visionaries podcast, where we showcase the leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of senior living, but we also talk a lot about best practices in nonprofit governance, because your board is the key to your strategic development as well as your competitive advantage that you enjoy as an organization. So today we're going to talk about the role of board chairs, what makes for an effective board chair, and maybe even give you some thinking about how you might select your next board chair. So here we go. The primary role of a board chair is to keep the organization on track toward its strategic goals, but fulfilling its mission. At its core, this role involves, of course, facilitating meetings. That kind of goes with the territory. But they also need to be strong leaders and role models for other board members. They need to practice effective governance and be kind of the, again, role model for best practices so that others follow along. And they need to support the CEO or executive director. That's a key part of the role of a board chair. Above all, the board chair needs to remember that his or her primary role is to help the board in ensuring a sound future for the organization. As John Maxwell says, a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. And so that's what we really need in a board leader. And we're going to talk about some of those key features and responsibilities in just a second. I want to share with you a case study of a nonprofit organization that I was involved in. It's a membership organization that serves women business owners of all shapes and sizes, beginning business owners up to multi-million-dollar companies, those that run multi-million-dollar companies. And so it's really to foster not just a sisterhood and a community, but to share information that helps these women business owners to be successful. So I was on the board for a couple of years. And in our first couple of terms, we were coming out of COVID, and we were really trying to recover as a membership organization after COVID, because COVID changed our business model. We weren't really doing networking events as much because people weren't coming to them. We couldn't do our educational events in the same way, and our membership was dwindling. So we took a strong focus on our governance, and we really tightened up the role of different board members, of the committees that we had. We got our bylaws into shape as a foundation, and then we set forth on how we were going to value add for our members in a way that promoted ROI to the organization, that would maximize our membership, but then also make sure that we weren't spending too much of our limited cash to put on these events, that we wanted to make sure that we were having the appropriate ROI for the different events. And I thought we had a really good business model moving forward. We were really struggling with some leadership transitions at the board level, and our incoming board chair had to resign her position before she was able to take over to continue the trajectory that we were on. And so we had to select an alternative incoming board chair. who was new to the organization and hadn't been through all that development work that we had done over the past year and a half. And this new board chair came in, and she was a wealth manager for her business, and she supported women in building their wealth, which was fantastic. But she wanted to change the all of the educational sessions that we provided to the organization, to our members, to be focused on wealth building for women CEOs. And I don't disagree that that's a great topic, but should it be the sole topic for the organization? That wasn't, it really changed the focus of how we were trying to support women business owners, right? They need to know about marketing and how to manage their financials, and also how to build wealth, and maybe some HR topics in there, things like that. So where we went from a real diverse educational calendar, it came down to, it was changed almost overnight to a calendar that was focused on wealth building for women CEO, which, by the way, since this was the chair's primary business, was a bit of a conflict of interest. Could have been managed, in an appropriate way. And I actually dropped off the board because my term had ended. So I'm not sure how it played out, except that all of the old board members, the legacy board members who had the opportunity to continue to serve on the board, dropped off because we had done all this work to get the organization to this point, and they were very dismayed at the change in focus for the board, which was made based on a singular opinion of the board chair. So she was driving her own agenda, and so we lost our legacy board members. So there was no continuity of the mission or the mission impact, and we started to lose membership because of that. And I'm not sure about the future of that organization, but that's an example of how a board chair can truly send the organization into a completely different direction, even if it was well intended, and I believe it was here, because they're driving their own agenda, they're not aware of the history, and they're not involving all board members in that decision making. And so, again, let's talk about core responsibilities of a board chair. So the primary role of a board chair is to keep the organization on track toward fulfilling its mission. So we already talked about that. One of the key ways it does that is through facilitating board meetings. And I just did an episode, episode 134, I believe, on facilitating great board meetings and some of the ways to really restructure your board meeting agenda to promote engagement, right? Because so your board chair is going to lead the board meetings. They're going to prepare the board agenda. They're really responsible for the engagement of board members in those board meetings. So I gave some great strategies about how you can flip the agenda from traditional agendas to put your strategic discussion at the very top of the agenda and have some more of that rote reporting or routine reporting at the end of the agenda. But you want to plan and structure the meetings for efficiency and engagement, and make sure that you're actively drawing people into that discussion throughout the board meeting. So that takes some motivational techniques. To sometimes you actually have to ask people to input if they're being quieter, and you have to find very constructive ways to quiet the loud voices so the other voices can be heard, to be sure that you're encouraging participation from all board members. You also need to be able to very tactfully manage conflict and disruptions. Mediating personality conflicts, I think, is probably one of the most difficult things that a board chair would have to deal with, but constructive disagreement is actually the hallmark of great decision making. So we need to promote constructive dialogue and just make sure it doesn't get out of hand and be disruptive. And then, of course, I need to make sure the right decisions are made, that the decisions that are needing to be made are made at the board meeting. So controlling the board agenda, the flow, how the meetings are happening, when we need to move discussion on to the next topic, all important roles of a board chair. That probably goes without saying. They're also providing the strategic leadership. So if things aren't happening the way that they need to, so say we set a strategic plan and we have our goals, some of the goals are board things the board needs to work on themselves, and some of the things staff need to work on. We need to make sure that we are making progress on all of our goals. And if we're not, it's the board chair's responsibility, because you're leading the strategic direction for the organization. It is the board chair's responsibility to hold the board accountable and or the CEO accountable, depending on whose responsibility it is for achieving those goals. So hopefully folks are holding themselves accountable and this isn't too much of a challenge. But if not, the board chair is really the person that needs to do that. We need to make sure the board also in that strategic leadership role is making sure that the work of the board and the work of the staff is aligned with the mission, that we're not having scope creep, that appropriate oversight is happening for the CEO for the finance and legal issues, that we're doing the performance assessment of the CEO. So they're really monitoring and in charge of all of the roles and responsibilities of the board of directors as a whole and making sure that those things are happening. They also want to ensure the governance and accountability is happening. So, are we following our bylaws? Are the committees in place that need to be in place? Are they doing the work that they're supposed to? Are they following their own charters? Do we have ethical decision making? Are we managing our conflicts of interest appropriately? And then we're holding the board members responsible for performing the work of the board and their behaviors and own engagement. So those are all things that happen within the board meetings and within the boardroom that the board chair is responsible for. Outside the boardroom, they also have a lot of important roles and responsibilities. First and foremost is supporting the chief executives. So they should foster a strong partnership with the CEO or executive director, maintain open communication, and always be available as a sounding board. And in fact, they should check in with their CEO likely weekly to see how things are going. There should be a standing meeting, a standing phone call with the CEO and the board chair on a weekly basis, if not weekly, every other week, just so the CEO can keep the board chair up to date, can ask questions. They are really the representative of the board, which is the CEO's boss. So you always want to have that two-way communication between those two folks. Also, outside the boardroom, they want to prepare future board chairs to lead in the same way with great, some of those great behaviors to ensure that continuity. They want to be able to provide constructive feedback to board members when needed about their performance, their engagement, or their behaviors. So, say there was a constructive dialogue that occurred during a board meeting and somebody's behavior was bordering on inappropriate. They were getting a little heated, maybe saying some things that could incite other board members. Great time to nip that in the bud with a conversation between the board chair and that board member and try to align expectations going forward. Another thing that a board chair does outside the board meeting is represent the organization, at times speaking to press, media, and other groups. Probably most of the time it's going to be the CEO. However, if there's a CEO transition, especially an unexpected one, a board member, the board chair would be expected to stand in to be able to speak to appropriate groups, even clientele. So, for example, in senior living, the board chair might speak to the residents to share with them what's happening with the CEO search and to help allay their fears or concerns during a transition. So those are some of the responsibilities. Now, what makes for an effective board chair? And there's so many things, right? So first and foremost, they need to have a strong relationship with the CEO. Again, we're going to be talking every week. They want the CEO to be feel supported, and so you need to just have this open dialogue, communication, and alignment between the CEO and the board chair. If there's a personality conflict there, it's going to be a long year or 2 years, depending on the length of their term. They are going to be the consistent enforcers of your bylaws, your meeting norms, your board code of conduct, your roles and responsibilities. If the board chair doesn't enforce those things, nobody will, and chaos will ensue. Or at least you'll have a lot of relaxing of standards, and then things won't be as productive or efficient. We have all those things in place for foundations so that we can be efficient and we can make great decisions, and everybody knows their swim lanes and what their roles and responsibilities are. So the board chair is the leader of all that. They need to be strong leaders in and of themselves. We talked about the fact that they're going to be leading the board meetings. They're going to be managing the discussions. They're going to have to move the discussions along. They have to make sure the strategic decisions are made when they are needed. They're going to be the role models, right? So they need to maintain the vision of where the organization is headed and make sure that as a leader, they're pushing everyone toward that vision. probably goes without saying, but they need effective communication skills. We are fostering open dialogue, so we are encouraging participation. We need to sometimes restate discussions when board members are spinning a bit. We might need to say, well, this is what I'm hearing. Is that correct? Okay, can we move on? Or to facilitate the discussion. And they need to have emotional intelligence, including self awareness. So if they hear a stupid question or what they perceive to be a non-intelligent or maybe even irrelevant add to the conversation, they need to be aware of their body language so that they're not rolling their eyes or, things like this. So emotional intelligence is really important as well. They really want to be focused on board development. So how are we continually learning as a board? What education topics are we bringing to the board? How are we learning from each board meeting how we can make that better? And they also need to be leading the succession planning so that we have ongoing leadership effectiveness. Now, you might say succession planning for who? For the board, for sure. So, how are we bringing on recruiting new board members and building that officer pipeline so we know who's coming up next in the leadership roles? And then, what is our succession plan for our CEO? Those things always need to be top of mind. And again, that's the board chair's responsibility to make sure we get those things done. So Joan Gary, who does a lot of work with nonprofit boards, also posed a few additional questions that you consider when you're looking for a board chair. So we mentioned at the outset that sometimes board chairs get elected into their leadership role because there's no one else to do it. So you haven't been chair yet. It's your turn, Jennifer. That's not the best way, obviously, to select your board chairs. Some of the things that you want to look for from board chairs, according to Joan Gary, are one, do they have the time to do this role? It takes a fair amount of time to be a board chair. You're interacting with the CEO on a weekly basis. You're taking time before the board meetings to plan the agendas with the CEO. And sometimes you're meeting with board members outside the board meetings to give them some constructive feedback or to work with committees, to mentor people. So it can be time intensive, and you want to make sure your board chair elect has the time to dedicate to that role. We want to also make sure that they have the autonomy of their own schedule. So for example, if somebody was an OBGYN and was sitting on a board and every other week they were on call, they're going to be called out of board meetings sometimes. And so you would lose your chair a fair amount of the time while they're off delivering babies. An important job, but they might not be the best role, or a board chair might not be the best role for them. Managing conflict. Can they manage conflict, or do they shy away from conflict? I've seen a lot of board chairs that are conflict avoiders, and boy, the deer in the headlights look comes up when there's any kind of challenging behaviors within the board. And that is a no-no. We really need somebody who can manage conflict actively and constructively. Likewise, we want somebody who can ask a tough question in a constructive manner. So maybe sometimes you might hear a CEO giving a report and talking about a program or service that they're working on that is a little bit outside the mission, showing a little scope creep. And so as a board, it's your role to challenge, is that within our mission and the mission impact that we want to have and are supposed to have? Is it aligned with our strategic plan, et cetera? And so sometimes it comes to the board chair to be able to ask that tough question and to do so in a constructive manner so that you're not pulling any respect away from the person who's posing the thing that you want to question. We want the board chair to be able to model good behavior, including when it comes to fundraising. And that means making a personal donation, but also being able to be an ambassador for the organization and an advocate when it comes to sharing the need for donations with prospective donor groups. We want them to be able to mentor incoming board chairs and committee chairs and really, not just model the great behavior, but it's a little bit different relationship when somebody's going to take your place as a board chair, and to be able to mentor them before that transition and stay with them as a mentor after the transition so that you can help them be the board chair that they need to be. And then they should also have a role in appreciating your CEO, showing recognition, appreciating the staff. And are these things that your board chair is willing to do? Hopefully, yes, but there are important criteria and you can tease out the answers to some of these questions before you ever put somebody into the position of being your chair-elect. You should really feel out their time commitment and their overall commitment to their board and whether they can serve in the way that you want them to. So these are all great things to think about in a board chair. And it is the most important role on your board. So, not to put any pressure on the existing chairs out there, but there's always room for improvement. And again, as your governance committee is looking at your officer pipeline, make sure that you're plugging people into the officer pipeline that have some of these characteristics that we're thinking of. And even if they don't have all the characteristics today, are they willing to learn and to become better leaders over time? I think that's really important as well. So that's our episode on effective board chairs. I hope you've learned a thing or two. And for board chairs who are incoming, I want to wish you the best of luck. It's such an important role. I'm here to support. Please email me at jennifer@peak2profit if you have any questions at all about anything I've presented. And there's lots of great resources out there from Board Source and Joan Gary and some of the other nonprofit resources online that you can access about how to be a great board chair. You've been listening to Senior Living Visionaries. I'm your host, Jennifer Drago, CEO of Peak to Profit. I'm a strategy and governance consultant. And I want to thank you for being here today. Please subscribe to be notified when a new episode is released at seniorlivingvisionaries.com or on your favorite podcast platform. I want to thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Senior Living Visionaries podcast and radio show, where we showcase the leaders and innovators in the industry who are pushing the boundaries and setting the stage for the future in senior living and services. Join us next time as we share the bold ideas and breakthroughs of the industry's most forward-thinking leaders here on Senior Living Visionaries.